world of cable news screaming and social media echo chambers, it's easy to lose the signal in the noise. Every day, policy is debated, votes are cast, and your tax dollars are spent. We cut through the headlines to bring you the critical context you need, focusing on what's really going on in news and politics. Welcome to the Analyticaliowan podcast. This is your daily dose of fact-driven politics. Let's analyze today's news. Here's Eric.
We are back here on the Analyticaliowan podcast. It is Saturday, May 2nd, as I am recording this. We got a lot to talk about because there's always a lot to talk about. Now, I've been having issues getting my content up. I'm going to be working through the week trying to get back on track. With my work schedule shifting a little bit this upcoming week, I've got a stretch where I'm going to have some more time during the day to get some content up, and hopefully I will be back on track if I can figure out what's been going on with Zoom and getting my podcasts uploaded by midweek. And then, like I said, I got my work schedule shifting a little bit. So there is a good chance that at least a couple days this week, I will have content up earlier in the day as far as the short form stuff done earlier. Still working on getting Spotify caught up. That has been the one thing that I've been having issues with when it comes to getting content, because it is, well, relatively simple to post. It is also time consuming, and it doesn't work with any of the other automation things I have in place, which just make it easier. I wish I could just automate it. Haven't been able to find anything that works. So would love something that did. And I'm looking into, well, there's been other social media apps been out there. We've been talking about Clapper, Upscrolled are two of them that could eventually replace TikTok. And ultimately, I want to, if I can find a way to automate to those platforms, I would love to include them in my portfolio. Same thing with Substack. If I could find a way to automate it and make it simple, the problem is having the time around work to get everything uploaded in a timely manner, where I rely right now on a lot of the automation to handle it for me. So looking into updating all of those. Now, some things to look forward to in the rest of the week. Coming up midweek sometime, I am probably going to be a panelist over on the Rational Boomer podcast. So keep that in. I'm guessing he's going to do a live probably Tuesday or Wednesday. And if he does, that will be a day I end up joining. If it's later in the week, I won't be available, as well as potentially jumping in. I know Trucker T and Pamela over on TikTok do weekend lives where we discuss news and politics, going into next weekend, and maybe even this weekend. We'll have to see how my schedule plays out, because I'm getting to this much later in the day than I would have liked. But we've got so much to talk about. We have to keep going. So I may end up jumping in, and sometimes, I no more scroll by it. I get hit with a, hey, come join us request. And then there have been nights I've joined Pamela on a live, and it's ended up being, I thought, oh yeah, I'll be there for an hour or so. And it's 7 hours later, we're still going strong. I mean, there have been some nights I've tried to stay awake and I've tried to hold on, and I've just dozed off, eventually get dropped, wake up to the live still going, and 6 or 7 hours later, it's just insane. So we got a lot to talk about. Yesterday, I was the guest on the Rational Boomer podcast. If you haven't checked that out, I encourage you to do that. Speaking of guests, Still looking for the first guest here on the Analytical Iowan podcast. You can send me an email if you are interested, analyticaliowan@gmail.com. Looking forward to doing something like that. The closest I've had to a guest was earlier. I think it was this year, maybe it was end of last year. I did a joint podcast with Mike, the Rational Boomer, and I've talked about trying to do that again. I always forget whenever Mike and I set it up to do an appearance over there and just say, hey, let's do this as a kind of joint podcast so I can record once and be done. That always sounds like a better plan anyway. So, what do we got going on today? Well, we have a lot actually. Um, you probably woke up to the news. Spirit Airlines has shut down, effective basically immediately. Now, Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy has come out and said that what Spirit Airlines is saying is their reasoning for needing to shut down isn't true. Why? Well, Spirit is saying that their reason for shutting down is the rising fuel prices. Okay. Jet fuel is going up. Gas prices, regular gas prices, are going up, all as a direct result of the Iran conflict. Now, with all of that, which Donald Trump is trying to say is completely done. We talked about that yesterday. But this is what Sean Duffy had to say. Duffy says Spirit was in dire straits long before the war with Iran. Multiple times they filed for bankruptcy. Their model wasn't working. They couldn't get to fiscal health, so this was not the impetus. The war has not been the impetus for Spirit. What else does he say here? Well, that's from that was from Spirit itself. Now, Sean Duffy has said that loans toward any airline would have to go through Congress. He says, if they want to come to the U.S. government, we would be a lender of last resort. If they can find dollars in the private market, I think that's better for them. He also noted that it would have to go through Congress for approval and they would have to be real need. Well, what do you call real need? You have Spirit, who is now out of business. Tens of thousands of employees are without jobs. Passengers who were planning to fly back on Spirit were stranded. And there wasn't a lot of warning that any of that was going to happen. Spirit Airlines going under with tens of thousands of jobs being lost is a direct result of Donald Trump and this administration and the war in Iran because of the rising fuel prices. Sean Duffy is correct in that they had filed for bankruptcy multiple times. Sure, they were struggling, but they were on their way back. It was sort of working. And this is what the CEO Dave Davis said to the Wall Street Journal, that they had a recovery plan and it was going to succeed. But what they said was everybody was burning cash. We just had a smaller pile to start with. The others are not far behind us in that race. Now, Donald Trump had previously floated a $500 billion government bailout for Spirit Airlines. And as I'm looking here, it didn't have any real backing. Let's see. Yeah, this was from a couple of weeks ago, a little over a week ago. Trump administration facing growing opposition from the political right over its plan to bail out Spirit Airlines, conservative raising concerns about the precedent it sets for the government involvement of business. Donald Trump floated the idea of a bailout Tuesday when reports surfaced that the administration was considering a $500 million, I think I said billion before, $500 million bailout for Spirit. A lawyer was looking at, or a lawyer had confirmed that talks were being placed. Senators Ted Cruz and Tom Cotton came out against the plan, said it was a terrible idea on Twitter, and Cotton referred to it as not the best use of taxpayer dollars. Senator Mike Lee said that competition among airlines suffers when the government bails them out. Senator Ted Budd, these are all Republicans, lashed out against the reported plan, saying Americans shouldn't be on the hook for another failing business as its competition thrives. Okay, but here's the problem with that. We've bailed out companies before, usually under Democratic administrations. If it wasn't for a government bailout, the auto industry, all three major auto makers would have been out of business, potentially. None of them were doing well. They went to the government, hat in hand, begging for a handout. I think that was in 2012, was it? Let's see. They did. Yep, it was 2012. No, 20. It was. Uh, yeah, it was 2012. I think was the um, bailout, and those loans got paid back by 2015, including interest. And now look at the price of automobiles, right? I mean, sometimes bailing out a business is the right option. Now, uh, some conservatives did compare it, or they're comparing it to the housing market bailout that they did under, I think it was a combination of the George W. Bush and the Obama administration. And basically, even back as far as 2009, it was what part of what led to the Tea Party, which was part of the way we got to MAGA. So the Tea Party was the precursor to modern day MAGA. That led to where we're at because of um, the bailout of the housing industry. And they've compared it to that. Uh, Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy was not in favor of the plan to rescue Spirit Airlines. Says there's been a lot of money thrown at Spirit and they haven't found their way into profitability. And we would just be forestalling the inevitability and then own that. If nobody else wants to buy them, why would we? Other GOP strategists had voiced concern that GOP opposition to Trump in the Senate could potentially lead to a fracture between some members and the White House. Let's see. I'm just reading this from The Hill. At a time when inflation is high, confidence in the government is low, and the last thing that any taxpayer or voter wants is to see the government spending money on a failed airline, this strategist said. But here's the thing. They would have saved tens of thousands of jobs. They would have kept a cheap airline flying, and they would have looked like heroes. And that's what Donald Trump wanted. Um, Now, what they could have done is done what they did with the auto industry, like I said, and give them loans at reasonable interest rates and end up, uh, charging them interest and giving them reasonable terms to get them back into profitability. But they're not doing that. But they didn't. But Republicans are fighting it. Now, here's the thing: if Republicans were consistent about or serious about actually bailing out Spirit, if they would have done it, so what if you had a few Republicans break off? I bet you more Democrats would have been in favor of it. They could have done what they did years ago and worked bipartisan, but they didn't do that. They didn't even try, from what I'm seeing. They were talking about it, but they said, "Yeah, we're just not going to do that bailout." So now you have a problem. Spirit is now out of business. A low cost airline is out of business. From what I understand, from what I've seen on what happened with Spirit, their um, business model or their business is completely shut. You show up at their counter, there's going to be nobody there. You show up to go redeem your flight, there's going to be no flights. Uh, Sounds like there is going to be potential for refunds, um, but it might not be very quick as we deal with this. The uh, um, the Spirit deal is uh, a problem here for this administration. This is just 10,000 plus more jobs that this administration has lost. Republicans are horrible for the economy. It gets proven time and time and time again. But here we are back with Republicans that, you know, they want to tell us how great they are and how good of a businessman Donald Trump is. But he let Spirit fail. Now, he wants to say it, and their administration is going to blame Biden. I guarantee you they're going to blame Biden. Why? Because during the Biden administration, there was an attempt for JetBlue and Spirit to merge. Well, when it came to those two merging, what ended up happening is it got shot down. The administration argued in court, the Biden DOJ argued that allowing JetBlue and Spirit to merge would eliminate competition. It would drive out one of the low fare options in this country. Now, that was in 2022, I believe. So Spirit held on for almost 4 more years. So what happened? How can they blame Biden? Well, because they can't admit Donald Trump's to blame. We go back to the rising gas prices. Okay. You have gas prices up, getting close to record highs. You have oil and gas hitting record numbers. And when all of it is said and done, there is uh, the blame to be laid squarely on the feet of Donald Trump because his war in Iran has caused the rising prices. And with the Strait of Hormuz still closed, 20% of the world's oil and natural gas flow through there. It's not moving. And even if they got it open today, which there is no indication that it is going to end up being anything but continuing to keep it closed for the foreseeable future, it would still take a while for that oil to get to port from all of the countries that use the Strait of Hormuz. Okay. As all that happens, it is going to take time, which means you're talking weeks, if not months, on the ocean for these tankers before they get somewhere where they can sell. It's not like uh, suddenly, as soon as they hit the ocean, the price is going to drop. That doesn't help us between here and there. We have to get them through. Now, there has been some reports that apparently the Navy is going to try to escort some ships through, and there may be a few ships that get through. But when let's see if I can find the number here. So even if from what we are hearing, they're going to start getting a few ships through. Even if we're talking 10 ships, 10 tankers, and I found the number. Before the strait was closed, it was between 135 to 138 oil tankers and cargo vessels per day. So that was before it got closed, and now none of those are flowing. There's no movement there. That doesn't help the global oil and gas price. It's going to continue to get worse when it's all said and done. See, this problem is of Donald Trump's making. And he doesn't have a plan to get out of the war in Iran. Now, he said to Congress yesterday that the war is over, that all hostilities have ceased, despite the fact that we don't have a permanent ceasefire, despite the fact that when it comes to any of it, that there is no plan. He just says, well, it's over. Why? Because that was the deadline for the War Powers Act, where he would have had to go to Congress to get congressional approval. And Donald Trump doesn't want to do that. Why? Because he says that, one, it's unconstitutional. He claims it's unconstitutional, but I don't think he knows what unconstitutional means, because the fact that the president needs to go to Congress for a declaration of war is literally written in the Constitution. And Donald Trump doesn't want to accept that. He likes to say anything that doesn't help him is unconstitutional. Why does he use that word? Because we use it against him and against Republicans, against them saying that certain things have happened, that you know, whenever he does something that is unconstitutional, we throw it out there. And Donald Trump doesn't like it. He knows it's got a negative connotation. He doesn't end up necessarily know exactly what being unconstitutional means. Now, as part of continuing with this talk of the Spirit Airlines shutdown, Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy did announce that United, Delta, and Southwest are going to cap ticket prices for Spirit customers seeking to rebook canceled flights. They must provide their confirmation number and proof of payment. This is coming from Sean Duffy. For any consumers worried about higher prices, American Airlines and Delta Airlines are offering reduced fares on high-volume Spirit routes. They said on Twitter, Allegiant has also confirmed to freezing fare prices across routes that overlap with Spirit to support impacted travelers. Frontier is offering up to 50% off. So they're till at least May 10th. So it looks like some of the other airlines are going to be picking up the slack. Now, this does say they are going to be processing. Spirit will process refunds who paid with a credit or debit card. Also, you are advised, if you are affected by this, to potentially, if you don't get a refund, to request a chargeback from your card issuer or your bank. A chargeback being one where you dispute the charge, they refund your money. They also said you can look at if you have travel insurance, that you could maybe use your travel insurance to offset the whole cost there. But the whole thing here is, at the end of the day, it does fall on Republicans and Donald Trump specifically because of the war in Iran, and everything, because they did cause it. They have all of their things when it comes to the closing of the Strait of Hormuz and the war in Iran has directly affected prices. Now, I mentioned the war in Iran and Donald Trump saying that it stopped the 60-day clock. He's trying to say that, well, we had a ceasefire, so that stops the 60-day clock when it comes to having to use the War Powers Act. Well, that's ridiculous, okay? That's not how that works at all. But Donald Trump is trying to use it that way he can restart hostilities down the road without having to go back to Congress and try to get authorization, because he's worried that it won't pass. Democrats won't sign off on it, and Republicans have such a narrow majority they can't keep their caucus together. Now, Friday, we had a ruling out of a 3-judge panel in Louisiana. They cited against the FDA, and they put they issued a temporary injunction nationwide that reinstated a 2021 requirement for the abortion pill mifepristone to be prescribed and dispensed in person. Now, I'm just reading through here. Supreme Court in 2024 upheld access to the drug unanimously, rejecting a challenge from anti-abortion doctors due to lack of standing. Basically, what they had said was the people suing weren't legally eligible to sue. But now this new case is all about whether or not it can be prescribed through things like telehealth and then acquired from mail-in pharmacies or pharmacies by mail. See, they pushed for it under Biden because the Biden administration permanently removed the in-person dispensing requirement, allowing for it to be prescribed via telehealth and by getting it by mail. But officials in Louisiana argued that they made it easier for abortion pills to be mailed to states where procedure is mostly banned. Louisiana has some of the strictest abortion laws in the U.S. and has attempted to prosecute out-of-state doctors for prescribing mifepristone and other abortion-related drugs via mail to in-state residents. The appeals court found that Louisiana was likely to succeed, so they put in the injunction. But this is going to be appealed to the Supreme Court, I guarantee you, and we will probably have a decision rather quickly, because this isn't a final ruling on the case. This is just a ruling on, well, because these three judges are saying, well, we think the people say, that are pushing for the ban are going to succeed in the case. We haven't seen their evidence yet, but we think they're going to succeed. So we're going to go ahead and say and issue the injunction based on that. I'm fairly confident this is going to be overturned by the Supreme Court, this preliminary one, and it's going to continue to play out. This probably will end up at the Supreme Court. Again, they already decided it once unanimously in 2024, so they may not end up even taking it up. But if they do take up the merits of this case when it finally gets there, we are probably not looking at them having oral arguments on whether or not they can issue mifepristone nationwide through telehealth and things like that again. As far as the merits of this case, I'm not talking about the preliminary injunction at this point, until sometime after October when the new Supreme Court session starts, and then we probably won't get a decision until May or June of 2027. This case is going to be out there hanging over the heads of lawmakers, and potentially this could be another case and something that gets brought into the 2026 midterms, where potential representatives and senators are going to be asked, where do you stand on access for mifepristone and things like that? Senator Patty Murray, a Democrat from Washington, wrote on social media, "The Fifth Circuit just told millions of women that three judges know better than the FDA, their doctors, and 25 years of evidence. They don't. I have no intention of letting this stand." And that's one of the things. Democrats are going to be fighting this tooth and nail. Now, Republicans, when it comes to not just this issue, but a lot of issues, they like to claim that they are the silent majority. They're not. They are a very vocal minority. But I grew up in a very religious household. I grew up in a very, I would say, overly religious area. And I've seen this upbringing. I know what this looks like. When it comes to things like abortion access or banning gay marriage or things like that, they think that because only a few people stand up and argue in favor of allowing for abortion access, you're talking about in the case of Roe v. Wade, Roe wasn't even her real name. But there was one woman who sued for the right to have access to abortion care. And now they're saying, well, just because a few people want access to it, it shouldn't affect the rest of us who don't. But see, what they don't understand is if you don't want access to it, don't get one. That's it. You don't go get one. It's that simple. But see, they don't look at it that way. They look at it from an entirely different perspective. They believe somehow that it is their right, it is their prerogative, it is their God-given duty to end up having the right to enforce this on everybody else, and that somehow it affects them, right? They feel that if their neighbor 3 houses down has an abortion, that somehow it deeply affects them because it's on their conscience for knowing it happened. When they may not even, unless that person tells them, they would never know. The other thing is, what they don't understand is they really should be pro choice. What they think we want on the left, and I've heard this argument before, is that we want to force women to have abortions who are having healthy babies who want to carry the pregnancy. And that's never been the case. But see, what they don't understand, there's a lot of things they don't understand. MAGA doesn't understand a lot of things. But what they don't understand is how, especially with late term abortions, but typically how anybody after the first trimester could go and get one. Well, you never know what might actually have happened. Usually, if it's in the second trimester, and I'm not a medical expert. I just know what I've read. Usually, there's still some wiggle room for personal choice, but a lot of times, second and late trimester, third trimester, late term abortions are done for health reasons. Usually, by the time a woman gets to be 3 months along, unless she somehow didn't know she was pregnant, um, would end up being uh, done because either they found out something through testing for the child, maybe something didn't develop right. Maybe you are looking at where they can tell through ultrasound or other testing. Maybe there is a uh, brain condition. Maybe the brain isn't going to fully develop ever. Maybe there's a heart condition where you are staring at potentially, decreased um, life expectancy, where you are talking about potentially having a child um, have um, all sorts of problems. Don't know what all of the situations are there, but typically it's for health problems. But what these anti-abortion people think is that a woman wakes up one day, decides, I don't want to be pregnant anymore, goes to the doctor and says, let's do this. Especially late term, when at any point after viability, they won't do an abortion. What they would probably do is one, they would try to get her some kind of counseling, some kind of mental help, something like that, or they would try to figure out a way of inducing her early if they absolutely had to, and birthing a live baby and letting her give the baby up for adoption, something like that. But see, Republicans believe firmly that they're doing the right thing. What they also don't understand is that when we are dealing with abortion care, if you have a miscarriage, if you have something like that, and they need to go in and you have an ectopic pregnancy, which an ectopic pregnancy is never viable, despite what um, some people in Congress were trying to ask. They were asking during a hearing on it if they could just surgically move the pregnancy from the fallopian tube to the uterus, and that is not medically possible with the medical technology we have today. Could it be possible at some magical point in the future when they have, or some unknown point in the future when they have figured out how to do that? Sure. I mean, there's all kinds of things that we know how to do today that we didn't know how to do 40 years ago medically. And that's only getting better. It's only getting, uh, you know, more advanced every single day. But see, Republicans don't think about that. They don't want to acknowledge it. And in part because the Republican lawmakers, they put in some of these exceptions into the laws. They put things like well, there's going to be, exceptions for the life of the mother. Except they tried that in Georgia. There was a mother who was not going to make it. She was declared brain dead. They kept her body on life support for months trying to develop and grow this baby. And we don't hear much about that story, and they're not talking about it because it didn't work. The baby is growing up with, is struggling to in fighting to live. It is not really that healthy. So because their medical experiment didn't work, we don't hear about it in the media. But see, the people on the right, they they take a look at these exceptions and say, well, that's all great. There's exceptions. Okay, you got exceptions for the life of the mother, but those are hard to get. Doctors are worried about losing their licenses and facing jail time, so they're not uh, getting anywhere with that. Um, and then they have the exceptions for rape and incest. Problem is, a lot of those require a conviction. Well, we know how fast the system works, the criminal justice system works. It moves at about a snail's pace. Um, so a lot of times, if it requires a conviction, well, just an accusation isn't good enough. And if they don't have a confession that the woman was raped, guess what? No abortion. Sorry, and it won't get handled till after. And one of the things I'm sick and tired of hearing when it comes to people on the right, when uh, um, it comes to these abortions, and I think Donald Trump himself has said it numerous times, that they talk about having abortions post birth. Well, that's not how that works. Anything done post birth would be murder. There's already laws on the books that prevent that. That is not an abortion, that is murder. Period. Plain and simple. But again, Republicans don't care about that um, in particular. They are just worried about what they think they're doing and what they think they're doing the right thing here. Now, one thing I didn't discuss on yesterday's podcast, there uh, was a bill passed. Donald Trump has now signed it. We have ended, after 75 plus days, the longest ever government shutdown. Now, it was only a partial shutdown, and it only affected one department. That was the Department of Homeland Security. He has funded basically everything except for ICE and the Border Patrol. Now, ICE and Border Patrol have funding. They have been continuing to operate during that shutdown because of the one big bullshit bill, where they drastically increased the funding to those departments anyway. This was going to be additional funding, and Democrats are holding out and saying we're not going to pass any additional funding for those two agencies without reforms. And Donald Trump is saying that they have all kinds of things that they're going to go through, and they are going to get this additional funding passed. They're going to make it work. But this gets DHS back open. That means TSA and all of those things are going to happen. Now, they could have been here a month ago, but Speaker of the House Mike Johnson and other House Republicans had initially vowed that they would not pass what ultimately did pass, separating out the two bills without funding for ICE and DHS, because they figured they weren't holding any cards if they did that they wouldn't get it through, that they were going to struggle. Now, they ultimately did, and they ultimately passed it in part because, well, yesterday was the first of the month, and they're staring at needing time to go ahead and end up having to pay even more for the services. Okay, they had to pay out for everything related to the people that were considered essential. Donald Trump had been trying to shift money around and make sure TSA was getting paid because he was worried. And while that was technically unconstitutional, he was playing a game of chicken when it came to um, uh, House and Senate Democrats. Why? Just like what he did something similar during the November government shutdown. And he basically told them that he wasn't going, or he was going to pay the military. And his whole plan was, well, sue me to stop me. And he thought he could get them to do something like that where they would end up with uh, stuff they could use in the midterm election. Um, so that didn't end up happening. So they signed it. ICE and Border Patrol did not get any additional funding. Democrats are holding out for the reforms. Now, what reforms are they looking for? They are looking for uh, forcing ICE to wear and use body cameras. Doesn't sound too objectionable. To wear identifiable badges like your local police, your local sheriff, things like that, where you've got a badge number and at least a last name. Okay. Then you have, they want them to not wear masks in public because they should be identifiable. So we know when things like what happened with Renee Good and Alex Preddy, we know who to hold responsible. But see, Republicans are balking at that. Oh, why would we do that? Uh, Democrats want to end the roving raids, where they are just wandering the street like a makeshift military and going into whatever home or business they think they can to go after somebody. Instead, they want them to go ahead and have to get judicial warrants and follow the law, go after and go back to um, targeted attacks and targeted raids. So DHS is open. Donald Trump did sign that bill, and now Donald Trump, of course, is going to end up um, probably taking a victory lap here for signing it. Wouldn't surprise me. His DHS secretary, his new one that replaced Kristi Noem, Markwayne Mullin, um, and he was in the Senate during the shutdown as a senator. He said after on social media, he said after 76 days, the longest government shutdown in history is over. He commended House Republicans' efforts to separately fund ICE and Border Patrol through reconciliation. So, quote, liberals can't play games with federal law enforcement funding, end quote. He also said, to be clear, Democrats, this Democrat shutdown never should have happened. Our great patriotic employees who have contributed or have continued to protect the homeland every single day without a guaranteed paycheck check. Thank you. President Trump and I are grateful to be in the fight to make America safe again. Well, isn't that nice? Except none of what the Democrats were pushing for was unreasonable. And you guys had the votes to push it through without Democrat support. And you couldn't do it because what the Democrats were looking for was not unreasonable. So the longest shutdown, 76-day shutdown, is over. And now we will see if they ultimately end up passing any kind of funding for DHS and ICE to give them additional money. But they're going to have to do it without any Democrats because the Democrats won't support it. Last little quick story I wanted to talk about comes from Maine. Graham Plattner, the Senate candidate, is pulling out of all Democratic primary debates after Janet Mills has dropped out. Basically, there is nobody else running against him, so they're just not going to do the debates. And that makes sense. Maybe he'll do some other event instead, but him dropping out of the debates does make sense. Plattner is a progressive outsider, an oyster farmer. Now there is David Costello, but I think Costello is about to drop out. There were 5 scheduled debates. And Costello wasn't even in the consideration. Like, by all polling, the winner was going to be Plattner anyway, which is why Janet Mills dropped out. Plattner had been leading Mills by 30 points in some of the polling. Mills said on Thursday she was dropping her bid because she did not have the one thing that political campaigns unfortunately require to do, financial resources. She was struggling to gain traction, even though she was backed by a lot of Democratic leaders, including Chuck Schumer. Although Mills did not endorse Plattner when she dropped out. But by all polling, and if you remember from the 2024 cycle, I don't entirely trust polls. But the thing with that is, all of the polling right now is showing that Plattner could beat Susan Collins, and that is huge. So, if Plattner, now that he basically has no opposition, he's got a chance to win and take the Senate race in Maine. I think that could be a lock. You add in a few of the others, and I think we do need to get to 4 gets us the seat if we trust, or gets us control of the Senate, rather, if we trust Fetterman in Pennsylvania. 5 would be preferred, then we don't have to worry about Fetterman. All right, that is going to do it for today's episode of the Analytical Iowan podcast. I want to thank you for taking the time to join me today. Hope you have a great day, and I will be back again tomorrow.
That was Eric. That does it for our analysis today. If you appreciated us cutting through the noise to get to the critical context, please make sure you're subscribed to the Analytical Iowan podcast on Spotify and YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.